World War II, Germany launched a series of rapid and decisive military campaigns that reshaped the European landscape. The war began on September 1, 1939, with the invasion of Poland, marking the implementation of Germany's new military doctrine, Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This strategy emphasized speed, coordination, and concentrated force, relying heavily on mechanized infantry, tanks, and close air support to overwhelm opponents before they could mount an effective defense. German soldiers, trained extensively in maneuver warfare, developed expectations of logistical efficiency and dependable equipment, setting a high standard for what they considered functional military support and industrial output. Following the conquest of Poland, Germany swiftly turned its attention westward. In May 1940, German forces invaded France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line through the Ardennes. This operation further demonstrated the effectiveness of Blitzkrieg and reinforced the confidence of German troops in their army's logistical and industrial systems. Soldiers became accustomed to a combination of speed, mechanized mobility, and the relative reliability of German-made weaponry. The early campaigns revealed the strengths of the German military machine but also exposed underlying limitations in industrial capacity and resource allocation that would later become critical factors in prolonged conflict. German industry in the late 1930s and early 1940s was highly centralized and geared toward military production, but it faced significant constraints. The Reich relied on a network of state-controlled factories, many of which were already operating near full capacity. Armaments plants produced rifles, artillery, tanks, and aircraft, but shortages of raw materials, particularly steel and oil, limited output. Manufacturing efficiency varied between facilities, with some larger factories capable of mass production, while smaller plants struggled to meet quotas. Despite these limitations, German factories were equipped with skilled labor and modern machinery, producing technologically advanced equipment that impressed even enemy observers. The experiences of German soldiers in these early campaigns were shaped by the combination of rapid victories and the quality of domestic weapons. Infantry units were supplied with standard-issue rifles such as the Karabiner 98K, while armored divisions operated Panzer I, II, III, and IV tanks, each representing the cutting edge of German engineering. Luftwaffe aircraft, including the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Heinkel bombers, provided air superiority that enabled coordinated attacks and minimized exposure to enemy defenses. Logistics units maintained the flow of fuel, ammunition, and provisions, though stretched supply lines occasionally created bottlenecks. Soldiers grew accustomed to these operational standards, forming benchmarks for efficiency, production reliability, and technological sophistication. By 1941, Germany had achieved remarkable territorial gains, controlling much of Western Europe and preparing for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Yet beneath the surface of success, the industrial landscape revealed cracks. Resource limitations, reliance on forced labor, and the strain of supporting multiple fronts placed immense pressure on German factories. While soldiers had witnessed a high level of domestic production, these conditions set the stage for later astonishment when German troops and prisoners of war encountered the vast scale and speed of American factories. The contrast between Germany's constrained industrial might and America's seemingly limitless output would become a defining observation for German soldiers, challenging their preconceptions and highlighting the pivotal role of industry in modern warfare. In the late 1930s, the United States stood as one of the world's most industrially advanced nations, though its factories were largely focused on civilian production. American industry had recovered from the Great Depression, fueled by economic growth, technological innovation, and the expansion of urban manufacturing centers. Major industrial hubs like Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Chicago were the heart of American production, each specializing in key sectors such as automotive, steel, and machinery. The nation's industrial infrastructure was characterized by large, mechanized factories capable of producing at a scale and efficiency rarely matched elsewhere in the world. The automotive industry, centered in Detroit, was particularly influential in shaping America's manufacturing capabilities. Companies like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler had perfected assembly line techniques that allowed the mass production of vehicles at unprecedented speed. These assembly lines, initially developed for civilian automobiles, demonstrated the potential for rapid, standardized output, a factor that would later prove critical during wartime. Skilled labor, a culture of innovation, and an abundant supply of raw materials gave these factories a competitive advantage, enabling continuous operation and high-volume production. Alongside the automotive sector, the steel industry formed the backbone of American industrial power. Pittsburgh, known as the Steel City, housed massive mills producing high-quality steel essential for machinery, construction, and eventually, military hardware. Steel production was supported by access to coal and iron ore reserves, ensuring a steady flow of raw materials. Similarly, shipbuilding centers along the East Coast and Great Lakes, such as Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Detroit, maintained a robust output of commercial vessels, employing thousands of workers and refining techniques in welding, riveting, and large-scale assembly. These industries collectively established a foundation for the rapid shift to military production once the United States entered the conflict. The American labor force was highly organized, skilled, and abundant. Unlike many European nations engaged in continuous conflict, the United States benefited from a population largely untouched by wartime conscription prior to 1941. This allowed factories to operate at peak capacity, integrating technological advancements such as automated machinery, precision tooling, and standardized parts. Worker productivity was further enhanced by innovations in time management, workflow optimization, and industrial engineering, reflecting a culture of efficiency and continuous improvement. Technological advancements during this period also positioned the United States to respond quickly to wartime demands. Precision machining, mass-produced engines, and standardized components were common in civilian manufacturing and could be adapted for military applications. Companies had already developed large-scale production techniques for automobiles, trucks, and consumer appliances, creating a transferable skill set that would later allow American factories to pivot seamlessly toward tanks, aircraft, and other war material. Despite being focused on civilian goods, American factories had built-in flexibility. The combination of mechanization, skilled labor, abundant resources, and efficient assembly processes created an industrial environment capable of exponential growth. When compared to European nations, many of which faced resource shortages, war damage, and labor disruptions, the United States had a significant advantage: a vast, intact industrial base ready to be converted to military production. By the early 1940s, American industry had established the groundwork for what would become a wartime production boom. Factories were prepared to shift focus from cars and consumer goods to planes, tanks, and ships with minimal delay. Engineers, managers, and workers understood mass production principles, and urban infrastructure supported the transportation of raw materials and finished products. This period of civilian-focused industrial growth, though seemingly ordinary, laid the foundation for the United States to become the arsenal of democracy, capable of producing material at a scale that would astonish the world, including the German soldiers who had once believed their own industry to be unmatched. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, marked a turning point not only in the global conflict but also in the trajectory of American industry. Prior to the attack, the United States had maintained a position of neutrality, supplying limited material support to the Allies through programs such as Lend-Lease. However, the destruction of battleships and aircraft in Hawaii galvanized both the government and private sector to rapidly mobilize for total war. American factories, already robust and technologically advanced, underwent a sweeping transformation from civilian to military production. Automobile plants, which had been producing millions of civilian vehicles, were among the first facilities to be converted. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, and other manufacturers repurposed their assembly lines to build tanks, jeeps, aircraft engines, and military trucks. The expertise in mass production, perfected over decades in automobile manufacturing, enabled these factories to pivot with remarkable speed. For example, the Willow Run plant in Michigan, originally designed for bomber production, could eventually produce a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes at peak output. The scale and efficiency of this transition were unprecedented, and it provided the Allies with a decisive advantage in equipment and material. Steel mills, shipyards, and aircraft factories similarly expanded their operations. Steel production was intensified to meet the growing demand for armored vehicles, artillery, and naval vessels. Shipyards along the East Coast, Great Lakes, and West Coast began constructing Liberty ships at record rates, with assembly techniques that reduced construction time from months to mere weeks. Aircraft manufacturers, including Boeing, Lockheed, and North American Aviation, significantly increased output, producing thousands of fighters and bombers to equip the rapidly expanding U.S. Army Air Forces and supply Allied nations. Labor policies were also fundamentally altered to meet wartime demands. The shortage of male workers due to military enlistment prompted the recruitment of women into factories, giving rise to the iconic Rosie the Riveter workforce. Women performed skilled and semi-skilled tasks previously reserved for men, ranging from welding and riveting to assembly line operations. The inclusion of women in the industrial labor force not only addressed workforce shortages but also demonstrated the adaptability and resilience of American society during wartime. Expansion of military contracts further accelerated production. The federal government established agencies such as the War Production Board, WPB, to coordinate resource allocation, prioritize contracts, and oversee conversion of civilian factories for military use. This centralization ensured that raw materials such as steel, aluminum, and rubber were efficiently distributed, minimizing bottlenecks and maintaining continuous output. Contracts were structured to incentivize rapid completion, high quality, and innovation in production methods. The overall economy experienced a rapid transformation. Unemployment plummeted as millions of workers were absorbed into industrial and military production. Cities experienced growth, with housing, transportation, and infrastructure adapting to accommodate the influx of workers. Technological innovation was accelerated as factories implemented new machinery, assembly techniques, and quality control measures to maintain output at scale. The integration of civilian and military production expertise created an industrial ecosystem capable of sustaining a long, multi-front war. By 1943, the scale of American industrial mobilization had reached staggering levels. Factories were producing tanks, aircraft, ships, and munitions at rates far surpassing pre-war expectations. German intelligence and POW accounts would later reveal that the sheer speed, organization, and volume of production was unlike anything the German soldiers had encountered in Europe. This period demonstrated how an intact industrial base, combined with technological know-how, labor flexibility, and coordinated government oversight, could be leveraged to achieve unprecedented military output. The rapid mobilization following Pearl Harbor laid the foundation for the United States to become the preeminent supplier of war material, shaping the outcome of World War II and leaving a lasting impression on both allies and adversaries. On December 29, 1940, nearly a year before the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered a landmark radio address to the American public, coining the term that would define the nation's wartime industrial effort, the Arsenal of Democracy. In this speech, Roosevelt emphasized the vital role of American industry in supporting Allied nations, particularly Britain, which was under sustained assault from German forces. The message was clear: even as the United States maintained neutrality, its factories, workers, and resources could be mobilized to supply the tools necessary for global defense and the defeat of tyranny. The Arsenal of Democracy policy marked the beginning of large-scale production for military support prior to formal U.S. involvement in the war. American factories began supplying tanks, aircraft, artillery, and munitions to Allied nations through programs like Lend-Lease. Between 1940 and 1941, shipments of war material to Britain, China, and later the Soviet Union reached unprecedented levels, demonstrating the capacity of the U.S. industrial base. By converting civilian production lines into military factories, the United States ensured that its output could meet both domestic needs and international demand. The scale of American production during this period was staggering. Aircraft manufacturers such as Boeing, Lockheed, and North American Aviation were producing thousands of planes, including the B-17 Flying Fortress and the P-51 Mustang. Tank production expanded rapidly, with factories turning out models such as the M4 Sherman, which would become a cornerstone of Allied armored divisions. Shipyards across the East Coast, Gulf Coast, and Great Lakes region produced Liberty ships at record speed, ensuring that personnel, supplies, and equipment could be transported across the Atlantic to sustain Allied operations. The volume and speed of this output far exceeded German expectations, with German intelligence noting that American factories operated at a level of efficiency and scale that seemed almost limitless. Historical accounts highlight the organizational and technological sophistication that enabled such production. Standardized components, assembly line techniques, and mechanized fabrication allowed factories to produce vehicles, aircraft, and ships with remarkable consistency and speed. Skilled laborers, supported by innovative management and government coordination, were able to maintain quality while scaling output to meet wartime demands. The collaboration between the federal government and private industry, facilitated through agencies like the War Production Board, ensured that raw materials were allocated efficiently and that production schedules were optimized for maximum effectiveness. The psychological and strategic impact of the Arsenal of Democracy was profound. For Allied forces, it provided a lifeline, supplying critical equipment that allowed them to continue fighting against numerically and technologically advanced German forces. For German soldiers and officials, reports of American production were met with disbelief. The volume of tanks, aircraft, and ships being produced in the United States challenged assumptions about Germany's industrial superiority and underscored the limitations of the Reich's own production capabilities. POWs later recounted astonishment at the sheer scale and efficiency of American factories, noting that equipment was produced faster and in greater quantity than anything they had seen in Europe. By 1942, after the United States formally entered the war following Pearl Harbor, the principles of the Arsenal of Democracy were fully realized. American factories not only supplied Allied forces abroad but also produced material for U.S. military operations, rapidly scaling up to meet the demands of a global conflict. The combination of advanced technology, mechanized production, skilled labor, and government coordination allowed the United States to achieve output levels unmatched by any other nation at the time. Tanks, aircraft, ships, artillery, and munitions flowed steadily from factories to the front lines, ensuring that Allied forces were equipped to counter and eventually surpass German military capabilities. In conclusion, the Arsenal of Democracy was not merely a slogan, it was a blueprint for industrial dominance and logistical superiority. By transforming civilian industry into a wartime production powerhouse, the United States reshaped the balance of power in World War II. The astonishment of German soldiers upon encountering this industrial might would later become a testament to the critical role of production, efficiency, and organization in modern warfare, highlighting how the United States factories became a decisive factor in the defeat of Nazi Germany. As the tide of World War II shifted, numerous German soldiers and prisoners of war, POWs, found themselves in the United States, providing first-hand accounts of American industrial power. These men, conditioned by experiences in Germany's own factories and wartime production sites, were unprepared for the scale, organization, and efficiency of U.S. manufacturing. For many, the exposure to American industrial sites became a revelation, fundamentally challenging their understanding of wartime production capabilities. One of the most striking features noted by German soldiers was the sheer scale of the factories. Automobile plants, previously producing thousands of civilian vehicles, had been transformed into massive military production centers. Assembly lines stretched for hundreds of meters, with thousands of workers coordinated in a highly systematic manner. Machinery operated continuously, producing components for tanks, aircraft, trucks, and artillery with remarkable precision. German observers often commented on the noise, speed, and synchronization of the assembly lines, which contrasted sharply with the slower, more fragmented processes common in German factories, particularly those strained by resource shortages and Allied bombings. The involvement of women in industrial production was another aspect that astonished German soldiers. Many had never encountered large-scale integration of female workers into heavy manufacturing. Women performed skilled tasks such as welding, riveting, engine assembly, and quality control, contributing directly to output that rivaled entire German divisions in productivity. POW accounts repeatedly mention the meticulous organization and dedication of these workers, highlighting a level of discipline and efficiency that exceeded the expectations of German observers. Resource abundance was also a source of amazement. Unlike German factories, which often faced shortages of steel, oil, and other critical materials, American plants operated with a steady and ample supply of raw materials. This enabled continuous production without the delays, bottlenecks, or rationing familiar to German soldiers. The contrast was stark. While German factories struggled to meet quotas and maintain quality under constrained conditions, American factories ran virtually uninterrupted, producing a staggering volume of tanks, aircraft, ships, and munitions. German POWs were particularly impressed by the adaptation of civilian factories for wartime needs. Automotive plants, for instance, were converted into tank and truck production lines with minimal disruption. Skilled laborers, trained in mass production techniques, applied their expertise to military equipment, demonstrating the flexibility and responsiveness of American industry. Observers frequently noted the combination of mechanization and human labor, with machines performing repetitive tasks while workers managed quality, assembly, and oversight, achieving both speed and precision simultaneously. The psychological impact on German soldiers was profound. Reports from post-war interviews indicate that many POWs were initially skeptical of the scale they were about to witness, expecting modest workshops rather than sprawling complexes. Upon entering these sites, they expressed disbelief at the number of workers, the speed of production, and the organization of operations. Letters and diaries from returning German officers often described a sense of awe, tempered by concern over the implications for the war. The realization that Germany could not match this level of production affected morale and underscored the strategic advantage held by the Allies. Comparisons with German factories highlighted fundamental differences in industrial philosophy and capability. While German plants were technologically advanced in certain sectors, they were limited by materials, labor shortages, and the constant threat of aerial bombardment. In contrast, American facilities benefited from abundant resources, a large labor pool, and protection from enemy attacks. Production efficiency was further enhanced by standardized components, mechanized assembly, and centralized coordination through federal agencies such as the War Production Board. German observers noted that these factors allowed the United States to produce hundreds, and in some cases thousands, of units per month, a rate that German industry could not match. In conclusion, the experience of German soldiers and POWs witnessing American factories underscored the immense disparity in industrial capacity between the United States and Germany. The combination of scale, organization, workforce diversity, and resource availability created an industrial environment that left a lasting impression on those who observed it. These accounts not only documented the remarkable efficiency of American production, but also highlighted the strategic significance of industry in modern warfare. For German soldiers, the exposure to American factories was both a revelation and a sobering indication of the formidable challenge posed by the Allied war effort. By the midpoint of World War II, the industrial capabilities of the United States and Germany had become a defining factor in the global conflict. While both nations possessed technologically advanced manufacturing sectors, the scale, efficiency, and resilience of their industries diverged sharply, creating a profound strategic imbalance. This chapter examines the production of vehicles, aircraft, tanks, and ships in both countries, highlighting why Germany could not match American output despite its early war successes. In the United States, the automotive industry became a primary driver of wartime production. Factories that had previously produced civilian vehicles were rapidly converted to build military trucks, jeeps, and tanks. By 1944, the United States was producing more than 100,000 military vehicles per year, with standardized designs and interchangeable parts allowing for rapid assembly and maintenance. Germany, in contrast, faced labor shortages and material constraints that limited vehicle production. Although German factories produced advanced tanks such as the Panzer IV and Tiger I, production numbers were far lower, often only a few thousand units per year, hindering the Wehrmacht's ability to sustain armored operations on multiple fronts. Aircraft production further demonstrated the industrial divide. U.S. factories produced thousands of fighters, bombers, and transport planes annually. The Boeing B-17 and North American P-51 Mustang, among others, were manufactured in massive quantities, allowing the Allies to maintain air superiority and strategic bombing campaigns. German aircraft production, while technologically sophisticated with models like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf Fw-190, was constrained by resource shortages, Allied bombing campaigns, and workforce limitations. By 1944, American aircraft output exceeded Germany's by a ratio of nearly 3-to-1, highlighting the cumulative impact of scale and resource management. Tank production reveals a similar contrast. The United States M4 Sherman became the workhorse of Allied armored forces, with tens of thousands produced and shipped to multiple theaters of war. Germany, although producing superior individual models such as the Tiger and Panther, could not achieve comparable volumes due to labor limitations, industrial bottlenecks, and bombing raids on production sites. This disparity meant that while German tanks were tactically formidable, they could not be fielded in numbers sufficient to counter the overwhelming quantity of Allied vehicles. Naval shipbuilding also reflected the divide in industrial capacity. U.S. shipyards produced thousands of Liberty ships, escort vessels, and larger warships, enabling the transportation of troops, supplies, and equipment across the Atlantic. The ability to rapidly replace losses and maintain supply lines ensured logistical superiority. German shipyards, however, suffered from resource scarcity, Allied naval blockades, and targeted bombing campaigns, severely restricting output. The inability to replace lost vessels or maintain a steady supply of merchant ships undermined Germany's strategic reach, particularly in the Atlantic and Mediterranean theaters. Several factors contributed to these disparities. Labor shortages in Germany became increasingly severe as the war progressed, exacerbated by conscription and casualties on multiple fronts. Allied bombing campaigns targeted factories, transportation networks, and critical infrastructure, disrupting production and creating bottlenecks. Resource scarcity, particularly in steel, fuel, and aluminum, further constrained output, forcing Germany to prioritize quality over quantity in many cases. In contrast, the United States benefited from an intact industrial base, abundant natural resources, a large workforce, including women and minorities integrated into production, and protection from enemy attack, allowing uninterrupted manufacturing at unprecedented scale. Standardization and assembly line techniques further magnified the U.S. advantage. Interchangeable parts, mass production, and mechanization enabled American factories to produce large quantities quickly and consistently. German factories, although capable of producing high-quality, advanced machinery, could not replicate the speed, scale, or flexibility of U.S. production systems. This difference in philosophy and implementation meant that while Germany excelled in technical innovation, it could not match America in sustained industrial output. In summary, the comparison between U.S. and German industry illustrates a critical factor in the Allied victory: the ability to produce vast quantities of military equipment efficiently and reliably. While Germany maintained technological sophistication and tactical effectiveness, it lacked the industrial scale, resource security, and workforce flexibility of the United States. This disparity would become starkly evident to German soldiers and POWs, who marveled at American factories and recognized the strategic consequences of America's industrial superiority. By the later stages of the war, the imbalance in production had become a decisive advantage for the Allies, shaping the course of battles, campaigns, and ultimately, the outcome of World War II. The industrial output of the United States was only part of the equation in supporting the Allied war effort. the logistical networks that transported this material to the European front were equally vital. By 1942, American factories were producing tanks, aircraft, trucks, artillery, and munitions at unprecedented rates. To transform these vast quantities of war material into operational capability for the Allies, a complex system of ports, railways, and convoys was established, ensuring that resources reached the front lines efficiently and securely. Ports along the East Coast, such as New York, Philadelphia, and Norfolk, became hubs of logistical activity. Cargo was organized, loaded, and dispatched in a continuous flow, with specialized docks and cranes designed to handle the massive volume of military equipment. Liberty ships, standardized cargo vessels produced rapidly in shipyards across the United States, were the backbone of these operations. Their construction was so efficient that the time required to build a single ship dropped from over 200 days to just under 40 days at peak production. These ships transported everything from tanks and trucks to ammunition and fuel, creating a continuous supply stream to support Allied campaigns. Railways within the United States played a crucial role in linking factories to ports. Raw materials like steel, aluminum, and rubber were transported from mines and processing centers to production plants, while finished equipment and vehicles were moved to coastal embarkation points. Freight cars were coordinated to maximize efficiency, often operating on precise schedules to ensure a steady flow of supplies. This internal logistics system allowed American industry to function as a unified, interconnected network, turning domestic production into an effective instrument of global warfare. Once at sea, supply convoys faced the threat of German U-boats in the Atlantic. The Allies implemented rigorous convoy systems, with naval escorts protecting transport vessels against submarine attacks. These convoys were meticulously organized, utilizing intelligence from code breaking and aerial reconnaissance to minimize losses. Despite constant danger, the majority of shipments reached Europe, supplying British, Soviet, and other Allied forces with critical resources. The speed, volume, and reliability of these supply lines directly contributed to the operational success of Allied campaigns across multiple theaters. The impact of this logistical efficiency on German soldiers at the front was profound. Letters, diaries, and post-war interviews reveal that Wehrmacht troops were often stunned by the scale and consistency of Allied supplies. For every tank or aircraft destroyed in combat, replacement equipment frequently arrived within weeks, a level of replenishment that German forces could rarely match. This contrast was particularly evident during the North African and Italian campaigns, where Allied mobility and firepower were sustained by the continuous arrival of American-built material. Soldiers observed that, while they faced shortages and delays due to bombing, resource scarcity, and overextended supply lines, Allied forces operated with almost limitless logistical support. Air transport also played a role, particularly in supplying critical or high-value items. Aircraft ferried spare parts, communication equipment, and specialized munitions to forward positions, supplementing the maritime convoys. Ports, railways, and air transport together formed an integrated supply network that maximized efficiency and minimized disruption, demonstrating the United States' capacity to project industrial power across continents. The historical significance of these logistics systems cannot be overstated. They not only ensured the flow of material to the front lines, but also allowed strategic planning to account for sustained operations over months and years. German military planners, constrained by limited production and disrupted supply chains, quickly realized that American logistical support was a force multiplier, enabling the Allies to recover from losses, maintain offensive momentum, and ultimately achieve superiority on multiple fronts. In conclusion, the combination of American industrial output and a highly organized logistical network was decisive in sustaining Allied operations in Europe. The integration of ports, railways, convoys, and air transport ensured that material produced in the United States translated into battlefield effectiveness. German soldiers witnessing the steady influx of supplies faced a stark reality. They were combating not just Allied forces but the industrial and logistical power of an entire continent. This chapter highlights how the United States' ability to connect factories to frontlines through efficient supply chains fundamentally shaped the European theater of World War II. Exposure to the industrial power of the United States had a profound psychological impact on German soldiers during World War II. For men accustomed to Germany's technologically advanced but resource-constrained factories, witnessing the scale, speed, and efficiency of American production was both astonishing and disheartening. Letters, diaries, and post-war interviews document a recurring sense of disbelief and anxiety, highlighting how the industrial disparity shaped soldiers' perception of the war and their nation's prospects. German soldiers who were captured and held as prisoners of war in the United States offered first-hand accounts of their reactions. Many described entering American factories and observing assembly lines stretching for hundreds of meters, with thousands of workers operating in highly coordinated routines. The mechanization of production, combined with the systematic allocation of labor, created an environment of near-constant output. Soldiers noted the speed at which tanks, aircraft, trucks, and munitions were produced, often remarking that the volume of material exceeded anything they had ever seen in Europe. This exposure shattered previously held beliefs about German industrial superiority, and left many questioning their army's ability to compete on a global scale. The role of women in the American workforce added another layer of surprise. German POWs frequently mentioned the presence of female workers performing skilled tasks, from welding and riveting to quality inspection and assembly of complex machinery. This integration of women into heavy industry challenged the soldiers' expectations, reflecting a level of labor flexibility that was virtually absent in Germany due to social norms and wartime manpower constraints. Observers often expressed admiration for the discipline, focus, and efficiency of these workers, recognizing that such contributions directly enhanced Allied military capability. Morale among frontline German troops was influenced by reports and intelligence about American production. Even before direct exposure, German officers and soldiers received information indicating that the United States was producing military equipment at an unprecedented scale. The arrival of additional Allied tanks, aircraft, and supplies in theaters like North Africa, Italy, and later Western Europe reinforced the perception that German resources were insufficient to maintain a prolonged conflict. Soldiers' diaries reveal frustration at facing superior firepower replenished almost as quickly as it was expended, highlighting the psychological weight of confronting an adversary with virtually limitless industrial support. Post-war interviews further illuminate the impact of American industrial might on German perceptions. Many former soldiers recounted a sense of awe and intimidation upon learning the full extent of U.S. production. The disparity in output, combined with the logistical networks that transported material efficiently to the front lines, created a recognition that Germany could not compete in the long term. Letters from German officers reflect a reluctant acknowledgement of American superiority, while memoirs describe a demoralizing effect on soldiers who understood that technological skill alone could not overcome the numerical and logistical advantage of the Allies. Resource shortages, forced labor reliance, and the constant threat of Allied bombing compounded the psychological impact. German troops were acutely aware that every delay in replacing lost equipment directly affected their operational capabilities. Observing or hearing reports about American factories producing tanks, planes, and ships in overwhelming quantities underscored the strategic imbalance, creating a pervasive sense of inevitability regarding the Allied advance. The combination of operational limitations at home and the exposure to an industrially superior adversary contributed to declining morale, particularly in the latter stages of the war. In conclusion, the psychological impact of American industrial power on German soldiers was significant and multifaceted. Direct exposure through POW experiences, combined with intelligence and battlefield observation, revealed a stark disparity in production capabilities. The scale, speed, and organization of American factories, along with labor integration and resource abundance, challenged German assumptions about industrial superiority. This recognition influenced morale, strategic outlook, and ultimately the perception of Germany's ability to sustain prolonged warfare. By demonstrating the decisive role of industry in modern conflict, The experiences of German soldiers illustrate how technological and logistical capacity can shape not only battlefield outcomes, but also the mindset of those engaged in war. A closer examination of individual American factories during World War II provides a clear illustration of why German soldiers and POWs were astonished by U.S. industrial output. Key production centers in Detroit, along the East Coast, and across the Great Lakes transformed the United States into the Arsenal of Democracy, supplying the Allies with tanks, aircraft, ships, and other critical material. These case studies reveal not only production numbers but also the organizational methods and labor practices that enabled unprecedented efficiency. Detroit, long recognized as the center of the American automotive industry, became the primary hub for military vehicle production. Major companies, including Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, converted assembly lines from civilian automobiles to military trucks, jeeps, and armored vehicles. For example, the Ford Rouge complex produced thousands of jeeps annually, while Chrysler's Detroit tank plant produced thousands of M4 Sherman tanks. The assembly line approach allowed each vehicle to be constructed using standardized components, reducing production time while maintaining quality. German observers noted that even high-ranking officers were impressed by the speed and coordination, remarking that production rates were beyond comprehension, compared to German facilities constrained by labor and material shortages. Aircraft production in the United States further demonstrated industrial prowess. Factories operated by Boeing, Lockheed, and North American Aviation produced thousands of bombers and fighters each year. The Willow Run plant in Michigan, dedicated to B-24 Liberator bombers, could ultimately produce a plane every 63 minutes at peak efficiency. Assembly lines were highly organized, with workers specializing in precise tasks, while managers coordinated logistics, raw materials, and quality control. German POWs who toured such facilities reported amazement at the integration of human skill and mechanized assembly, contrasting it with German production lines, which often faced interruptions due to Allied bombings, resource scarcity, and workforce shortages. Shipyards were another critical component of U.S. production. Liberty ships, designed for rapid construction and standardized assembly, were produced at shipyards along the East Coast, Gulf Coast, and Great Lakes. At peak output, a single yard could assemble a ship in under 40 days, a significant improvement over pre-war standards. Welding replaced traditional riveting, enabling faster construction, while prefabricated sections were assembled systematically to accelerate completion. German intelligence and POW accounts highlighted these methods as revolutionary, noting that the ability to replace losses at sea allowed the Allies to maintain logistical superiority, even under constant threat from U-boats in the Atlantic. The integration of labor into these production efforts was equally significant. Factories employed tens of thousands of workers, including large numbers of women and minorities, performing skilled and semi-skilled tasks. This diverse workforce allowed for continuous operation across multiple shifts, ensuring near 24-hour production cycles in critical facilities. German soldiers, accustomed to a predominantly male workforce and slower production rates, were struck by both the scale and efficiency achieved through this labor model. Quantitative data reinforces the qualitative observations. By 1944, the United States was producing approximately 86,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks and armored vehicles, and over 6,000 naval vessels, including Liberty ships. In contrast, Germany's production for the same period was significantly lower, roughly 40,000 aircraft, 25,000 tanks, and a fraction of Allied naval vessels. This disparity illustrates not only the scale of American manufacturing but also the impact of organization, resource availability, and workforce integration on output. German POWs frequently recorded their astonishment in letters and diaries. Descriptions of the continuous assembly lines, the enormous number of workers, and the speed of production emphasized the perception that American industry operated at a level beyond imagination. Officers noted that equipment could be replaced rapidly, allowing Allied forces to maintain operational momentum, while German factories struggled to keep pace under the combined pressures of labor shortages, material scarcity, and Allied bombing campaigns. In conclusion, case studies of Detroit automotive plants, aircraft assembly lines, and shipyards illustrate the factors that made American industry unparalleled during World War II. The combination of standardized production, mechanization, skilled and diverse labor, and abundant resources created an environment capable of sustaining a global war effort. German soldiers and POWs, observing these factories firsthand, gained a unique perspective on the industrial power supporting the Allied armies. Their accounts highlight the strategic significance of American production and its decisive contribution to the outcome of World War II, reinforcing the central thesis that industry, organization, and logistics were as critical as combat on the battlefield. The industrial mobilization of the United States during World War II left a profound and lasting legacy on both the conduct of modern warfare and the strategic understanding of industrial power. By transforming civilian factories into massive military production centers, the United States was able to supply the Allied forces with unprecedented quantities of tanks, aircraft, ships, and munitions, fundamentally shaping the outcome of the war. The experiences of German soldiers and prisoners of war, who directly witnessed this scale and efficiency, provide valuable insight into the strategic significance of industrial capacity and its role in sustaining military operations. The scale of American production was unmatched. Automotive factories in Detroit produced tens of thousands of military vehicles, including jeeps, trucks, and M4 Sherman tanks, using standardized components and mechanized assembly lines. Aircraft manufacturers such as Boeing, Lockheed, and North American Aviation produced thousands of bombers and fighters, while shipyards across the East Coast, Gulf Coast, and Great Lakes assembled Liberty ships and other naval vessels at record speed. The integration of women and minorities into the workforce allowed continuous production across multiple shifts, while centralized oversight through agencies like the War Production Board ensured the efficient allocation of raw materials and resources. Logistics and supply chains were equally critical. Ports, railways, and convoys enabled the rapid movement of material from U.S. factories to Allied forces in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. Liberty ships, coordinated convoys, and protective naval escorts ensured that tanks, aircraft, and munitions reached front lines with remarkable speed, minimizing shortages and sustaining operational momentum. The contrast between American logistical capacity and German limitations, including resource scarcity, bombing disruptions, and labor shortages, highlighted the strategic advantage provided by efficient supply networks. German soldiers who observed these operations firsthand frequently noted their astonishment, acknowledging that sustained production and reliable supply were decisive factors in the Allied war effort. The psychological impact on German troops further reinforced the significance of industrial power. Letters, diaries, and post-war interviews reveal that soldiers were both impressed and demoralized by the apparent limitless production of American factories. The rapid replacement of destroyed equipment, the integration of women into skilled labor roles, and the sheer scale of output created a perception of inevitability regarding Allied victory. This experience shaped post-war analysis of industrial warfare, influencing German military planners and historians in their evaluation of production, logistics, and strategic planning. The disparity in industrial capability underscored that technological innovation alone could not ensure military success without the support of a robust, flexible, and well-resourced industrial base. Lessons from the American example extend beyond wartime production. The integration of civilian industry into national defense planning demonstrated the importance of preparedness, resource management, and workforce mobilization. Mechanized assembly lines, standardization of parts, and efficient labor utilization highlighted best practices in production management. The experience also emphasized the value of centralized coordination to optimize output and minimize bottlenecks, a principle that has influenced both military logistics and industrial planning in the post-war era. In conclusion, American industrial power during World War II was a decisive factor in Allied victory and a defining feature of modern warfare. The ability to produce vast quantities of military material, efficiently transport it to combat zones, and sustained operations over multiple theaters showcased the transformative impact of industry on military strategy. German soldiers and POWs who observed this capacity provided compelling testimony to its scale and effectiveness, shaping post-war understanding of industrial warfare. The legacy of the United States industrial mobilization endures as a benchmark for logistics, production efficiency, and strategic planning, demonstrating that the outcomes of modern conflict are determined not only on the battlefield but also in factories, shipyards, and supply chains.